This video we are going to learn how to do what's called factoring completely. So our first step is by dividing the greatest common factor out. Now if you think all the way back till first trimester when we learned about the greatest common factor, this time we're looking at all three terms. We're looking for a number that goes into every term. So I'm looking here and I see a -1. We've obviously got a -8 and a -16. So we can kind of drop the x's for now and just look at the numbers. The only thing all three of them have in common is a negative. So I'm going to factor the negative out. So this is going to turn into y equals -1 or negative x squared. Dividing it out of the -8x, it becomes positive 8x. And -16 divided by -1 is a positive 16. Once I do that, I have to keep factoring. So now what's left inside, I can set up my t-chart. One thing to keep in mind is that if your x squared term isn't just x squared, your t-chart won't work. So we've got to factor that negative out before we can set up our t-chart. So in this one, we're looking for what multiplies to 16 and adds to 8. 8 times 2 is 16, but of course 8 plus 2 is 10. 4 times 4 equals 16, and 4 plus 4 equals 8. So I found the numbers that work, so I'm going to factor this. Don't lose that negative out front. You don't need to put it in front of both binomials, just one. So we've got x plus 4 times x plus 4. And on this one, we can simplify because my two binomials are the same. So I'm going to write it as x plus 4 squared. All right, let's take a look at another example. First, we have to find the GCF. So we're looking at 2, -12, and -14. You can kind of ignore the x's, just look at the number. And 2 goes into all three of those numbers. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. First term leaves me with x squared. -12x divided by 2 is -6x. And -14 divided by 2 is -7. So then I'll set up my t-chart. What multiplies to -7, so ignoring that 2, we're just looking at what's in parentheses, and adds to a -6. Well, the only numbers that multiply to 7 are 7 and 1. And if I have to add to a negative, the bigger number will be negative, because -7 plus 1 gives me a -6. So finish my factoring, the 2 stays out front, x minus 7 and x plus 1 go in the parentheses. They're not the exact same, so I can't simplify this one, so I'm done. We'll just practice that a couple more times. Once you feel like you've got this, go ahead and jump to the U-try. Start by dividing out that GCF, so we're looking at 4, 12, and -40. And what goes into all three of those is 4. So dividing our first term by 4, we get x squared. Dividing our second term by 4, 12 divided by 4 is 3. And -40 divided by 4 is -10. So then we set up our t-chart with just what's inside the parentheses. So what multiplies to -10 and adds to 3. Well, I'm thinking 5 times 2, and if they're adding to a positive, that means my bigger number needs to be positive. So I'm going to put the negative on 2, and 5 plus -2 is 3. So I'm going to factor them, leaving my 4 out front, x plus 5, and x minus 2. Again, if those binomials aren't the same, then we can't simplify. Last example, GCF, what goes into -3, +3, and -36. Because I don't want my first term to be negative, I'm going to factor a -3 out instead of a +3. So -3x squared divided by -3 is x squared. 3x divided by -3 is -1x, or -x if you simplify it. And -36 divided by -3 is +12. Then we're going to set up our t-chart. What multiplies to 12 adds to negative 1. Make sure you don't put a variable in your t-chart, just get that coefficient. 6 times 2 is 12. Since I'm adding to a negative, the bigger number should be negative, but negative 6 plus 2 does not equal negative 1. 3 times 4 is 12. The bigger number should be negative. Negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. So when I factor this one, leaving my coefficient out front, my GCF, and then I've got my x plus 3 times x minus 4, which aren't the same, so I can't simplify. And your U-try questions.